Really happy to be here with you guys. We're going to talk about a really important and vital subject, a subject that is near and dear to my heart. And this is on the data surveillance economy, or one term that's being used, data valence economy, which is a portmanteau, right? That means data surveillance economy. Cool. We're going to get too philosophical yet, my friend. So I'm going to have my fine panelists here, these gentlemen, introduce themselves briefly, and we'll go ahead and jump right into it. We have a limited amount of time, and we want to get to the meat of the matter and to the value as soon as possible. It's a really important subject.
Boops.
Sebastian, you can start us off, brother.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I'm Sebastian, founder of Hopper, MixNet infrastructure. And on top of Hopper, we're building Gnosis VPN. So recently I also joined Gnosis as VP technology, overseeing not just Gnosis VPN, but also projects such as Gnosis Pay, Circles, which is also called Fair Money, and Metri, a progressive web app wallet.
Hello, everyone. I'm Simon, but most people know me as Sudo. I am head of community at NIM, which is also a MixNet-based project, and we're also building a VPN called NIM VPN. Looking forward to this chat.
Hi, my name is Joshua Davila. I have a lot of hats. Does not include building a VPN, but I have a blog and a podcast called Blockchain Socialist. I have a book that came out last year called Blockchain Radicals, and I'm a co-founder of Breadchain Cooperative, which is also building on Gnosis Chain.
Nice. Thanks, gentlemen. So let's start this discussion on data surveillance and the data economy. But so now it's time to get philosophical, right? There's probably, by show of hands in the audience, who here it really has what they would say, understanding of just the term data. Yeah, that's my thought. So if you guys can take the time to demystify the idea of data for the audience, because we're all here for data storage, but what the hell is data?
Well, all right. I mean, I approach this as an engineer, right? So data is typically in binary format, zeros and ones, that encode information about our lives and our identities that lives not in the meat world, but in the digital sphere. And as such, it carries information not just about me, but more importantly to me also about the interactions that I take, right? So it both includes the data itself, as well as the metadata about the connections that makes some things really cool for people, like TikTok, right? And some things really toxic in the world, like, manipulation of processes that should work differently than, the governance of TikTok. And yeah, to me, it's basically the thing that fuels our society in so many different aspects. But I heard a really much nicer definition before that. Like,
this is just building on top of what he said, actually. So in the real world, right, your personality or your body is kind of defined quite clearly. So I'm sitting here, here's my skin, right? So here's my personhood, right? Online, there's no such thing, not for individuals, but also not for states. There are no states or persons online. There's just data. So the reason why data sovereignty is very important, which we're going to be talking about a lot today, is because your online data is actually your personhood online. So this is why this topic is very important. Anything to add?
I mean, maybe I'll just add like contextualization because maybe it's interesting and because that's something different than what you guys said. But yeah, I think what we've seen, obviously the past few decades, the kind of like datafication of the world or economy, that if we try to the kind of like the way that we think about the individual today is like quite different than the way that we think about the individual maybe like in more industrial forms of capitalism or even like the medieval age, like before it was not so easy or simple to unbundle our identity in such a way that data is able to. And by having these records of like specific types of action, it has kind of like fed into, I think, a particular view of the individual and a way that is quantifiable. Of course, there is like a prehistory to data, which I just think of just like an umbrella term for many different things, actually, that has just become much more important because of the introduction of computers and the internet. But yeah, I mean, before that, it was you could argue, in the book, like Seeing Like a State, for example, James C. Scott argues that the state used specific measurements around things in order to have some ability to surveil and control the use of resources among its peoples and civilizations. And this has now, through the advance of technology, this power to surveil and use and have metrics and create metrics and keep up with things is now in the hands of also corporate interests that have a lot of money and have the ability to not only define like these metrics, but also compute the things that are in between all of these separate points. So it's you not only know the specific thing, but about the specific thing in which how it relates to the rest of the data points. And that's something that is the most, I think, pertinent issue with the advancement or the proliferation of data.
I'm really glad Josh mentioned that too, just briefly for the audience. James C. Scott, in his book, he referred to these people who try to control everything and control people's data, their personhoods, their livelihoods, their souls as high modernists. The high modernist mindset is a control mindset. So this is nice how this feeds into the next part of this discussion, because we really want to understand what is the current data status quo. What does the world of data look like? Who controls it? Who owns it? How does it get moved around, and how does it impact us?
Let me actually connect to what Josh said with a super brief kind of historic wrap up. So if we think about data like naming, right? So I think a bunch of people here in this room are also working on naming systems. How did that work in the past, right? So a name was typically given to a person from church, right? Like in my little part of the world, there was something like christening, right? So a child would get christened and got their name. And you had marriage, again, kind of an authority that was managed by church. And then you have identity, typically embodied by forms of a passport, which are issued by nation states, right? And well, then we had obviously some form of communication. Eventually, people had a telegraph and a telephone, which was mostly, again, like nation state mandated. And, for a large time, human society got away with it because even those central issuers couldn't really do a lot with that. But what evolved over time is that we now have powerful for-profit corporations, right? They don't really even pretend to have kind of some higher goals like a church or a nation state does, right? And so it's for-profit corporations that now issue names, right? Like when I ask you, like, what's a name? People typically give their Twitter name or something, right?
Or their TikTok.
Or their TikTok name. And, that also means we have private for-profit corporations which are in charge of naming, identity, and interaction layers. And that, to me, is inherently broken.
Well said. Any other thoughts on that, guys? Because we really want to. You had mentioned something earlier too, Simon, about AWS and about Google, and these guys specifically being arbiters of control over our data.
Yeah, well, you asked where our data lives, right? Everybody knows about cloud. Our data today is in cloud. Whether you're a corporation or you're an individual, most of your data is in the cloud. You have Google Photos to store your photos and organize them and all of that stuff. If you're an organization, you're going to be running your website or storing your data in the cloud. Now, where is the cloud, right? Three corporations, AWS, Google, and what's the third one? Help me out here. What's the third? Microsoft, yeah, thank you. Control 63% of the cloud market. Of that, the biggest one is AWS with 33%. And all of these corporations are American. Now, what does this mean? I think this is the important question about where our data is. Most of our data is in the United States. Has anybody heard about the Patriot Act? So basically, according to the Patriot Act, or the U.S. government has like legal jurisdiction over any data that resides within the United States. Now, I'm a Hungarian citizen, right? But let's say I use Google products. My photos are in Google Photos, which means that a bunch of them will end up on U.S. soil. Then, if I become a person of interest to the U.S., they have legal jurisdiction to search me. I think this is the big problem. And when we're talking about data sovereignty, there's probably something to solve, maybe through decentralized technologies.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and say that we're probably all here persons of interest to the United States government.
By being here.
I hope so. Then you're doing something right. Yeah.
Yeah. But we are not afflicted by the chilling effect, my friends. So here we are. So, yeah, one of the things I think of, and maybe we can elaborate on this, and maybe Josh has some thoughts as well. The greater terminology that we can use to describe the data valence economy that we're embedded in has been referred to as data colonialism. The idea of data colonialism means that governments they're incentivized to do what they can to control the flow of data, because that allows them to manipulate and control people. It allows them to generate and accumulate capital as a result of the existence and coalescence of vast sums of data over time. And it's a terrifying prospect. So how would you characterize this, Josh? Do you have any thoughts on this as well? I know that you've written in your book about, some of this material, maybe loosely.
Yeah, so actually, I mean, ironically, I wanted to mention that because I wanted this quote is from someone who actually who accused me of being a CIA plant. So ironically, but yeah, Getty Morozov said that I actually agree with. I mean, a lot of problems with him, but I agree with him on this. He said that technology is basically geopolitics by other means, which I think is like very apt in that the kind of like big thing that we don't really question with the advancement of technology is like, where is it? Who owns it? Who gets to keep it and who has governance rights over it? Whenever data is becoming so enmeshed in capital and capital accumulation, and we have just like zero mechanism to govern that data, we just simply we just kind of default on like it's basically like capital, so it's like it's on a free market. Whoever accumulates wins in the market, and that's a good thing. And we just kind of leave it at that. We're kind of getting into the position where we are today, where the U.S. being the country that has like invested the most or has had whatever the most amount of luck in being able to play this game of kind of building on the internet and taking advantage of the digital revolution. Now, Hungarian citizens' data is like in some data center in San Cupertino or whatever the city's called in California.
Nice. Okay, we have about 12 minutes left. Right now, we've just been talking about Jeremy Bentham's panopticon that we currently live in, which is an unfortunate circumstance. But we're also here because we want to find solutions to these problems. It's not all about doom and gloom. So what can we do to try to fight back against the data valence economy? How do you guys see our technologies, our philosophies? How do we push forward to fight back and to decentralize data for the average person?
Can I ask, first of all, in the audience, like, do we want to fight back? Like, or are we maybe fine? Okay, maybe that's a silly question. Maybe that's a silly question for here, but I was just before at an event today, which had, in the center of a slide, in the center of attention, a bunch of DeFi things were around. In the center of it all was US banking system. I was like, where the hell have we gone wrong here? So I think it starts with intent. Like it starts with, yes, decentralized and credibly neutral technologies are actually there and you can actually start using them. You just have to have the intent and not just be a lazy motherfucker, right? Yes, that is possible, right? And if you have the intent and urge to do that, you can and you should. And I would please urge people to do so, right? So that's the first one. And the second one is like, yes, empowering people by giving them custody, not just over their money. Like money is great, right? Yes, money is great. Like money paid for this fantastic venue. But we need custody over data and not just money. And that, I think, is something also very important. Of course, that's way harder than building DeFi, right? Building apps around self-custodial data is so much harder than building like the freaking next restaking RWA, perp DEX. And yeah, I'm happy that we have such an event here to try to, foster a community that is actually eager to build that. And to me, that is the most important one. And again, yeah, technologies need to be around for that. Sure.
Well said.
I think that's a great point. Intent is important, but what's important to also keep in mind is that intent is important from us, the builders, right? we can't expect the same amount of intent from the user side, right? So I think what's kind of missing from the Web3 crypto space in general these days is this realization, with a few market exceptions, but UX and features and just the simplicity of everything that we have in the Web3 space is not there yet, right? So if we want mass adoption, if we want to fight back through decentralized technologies, then people obviously have to use those technologies, because otherwise they're going to stay on AWS. We're going to have decentralized data, and things stay the same. To get them on our platforms and our tools and our systems, we got to make sure that the UX is there. So there are a few like market examples, like I mentioned. For example, ZooPass is a great example of something that just works. It's out of the way. It's zero knowledge technology, right? You don't even know, because it just works better than some non Web3 alternatives, right, or non decentralized alternatives. So there are examples, but I think we're lacking in this regard. What I would recommend every builder to do is to make a normie sit down in front of your product and ask them who has experience with other products from the competing space, and ask them, do you notice any difference in terms of performance, in terms of UX, in terms of features? And if they do, go back to building. It's a high bar to clear, but we gotta be at the same level as the competition is.
Can I follow up with a question here? Do you think it is possible to, on the one hand side, build something that a normie can understand? On the other hand side, give them self-custodial control over the system? Because to me, it seems like that really is the challenge, right? To have both.
It's a big challenge, but through abstraction, you can achieve basically anything. So if you boil it down to the actual interface that the user interacts with, if that's simple enough, I think this can be doable, yes. What do you think, Josh?
Well, the one thing that I had in mind, like, yes, I think that's like the thing that we hear in like a lot of panels when it comes to open source stuff is like, we need to make it easy for the user, which is like definitely true. I think so the way that I'm thinking about it, this is still like a half thought that is I'm still mulling over, but I think I like it. Is that, yeah, I don't know if you guys seen that meme of like the coder talking to another, or developers talking to each other, and the guy is like, I copied your code, and then the other developer is like, awesome, and then like the designer is like, I copied your designs, and then the designer is like crying, like, why would you steal my designs, I think there's something like very ideological about that. And so like, yeah, this is based on a conversation I literally had before with my friend Anuj over there. Where I think that design, like thinking about design as the place where human computation happens. So like, right, the issue with kind of the datafication of everything is that, it's not just that data is everywhere and we can all look at it, is that we can also like compute through it. Like it's like what is in between everything is like really kind of like the big part of the danger. And the way to kind of like fight back is to like have users be able to like understand what is happening, and for them to be able to compute through their brains like what they are giving and what they're not giving, and like make sure that they have like full consent about what's happening or not. And that's something that is often, design is often seen through the lens of like, how do we make things frictionless? And like that can be good in maybe some circumstances, but I think in others it's also about like, how do we just make responsible design around data, because design is governance. And so like I think there is a need to, I'm sorry to the designers, we need to open source your designs a little bit, to push for like just like we, with open source code, we're able to like, all congregate around like, oh, that's probably the best code to use. I think we do need to congregate around a little bit about like, what are probably some of the better designs we need to have, and by open sourcing it, like allow other people to then have this kind of like standards of how people can compute themselves as like a user, as a single person, to consent about how data is used or not.
Yeah, so I'm really hearing two things. This is an important conversation. So user experience is one part of this. People have to be able to use the technologies that we build, especially around data, because it's so important. The other component of this that I thought that I really heard, and now is now an earwig, right? It's embedded itself into my brain. It's this idea that most people are just, they're YOLOing into whatever technology they want, and at the same time they're giving their quote unquote consent away, and now so their data is just being absconded with, right? So I think Cambridge Analytica scandal, right, where those guys took all this data and then it got sold and then it was used for manipulation in a presidential election. So how do we route around that, or what is the solution space? And I'm going a little bit off the reservation here because it's an interesting discussion. How do we solve for that? How do we empower people to understand the extent of what they're giving away, right? Because as we discussed earlier with the idea behind data, they're not just giving away some random information. It's like really it's their livelihood, it's their personhood, it's their soul, it's the depth of their character that they're handing over to just whoever.
I think I have a sad answer, and it is through education and not technology. Like ultimately, ultimately we're building resilience tech here, right? So we're building resilience tech that empowers an individual to take more agency in their lives in whatever they do, not just with their money. And to get there, like you said abstraction, I'm like, yeah, abstraction is kind of cool, but abstraction might abstract the way that I understand what the asset is, or again, what the data is that I'm actually giving up here, right? So, and I think, that's why I said it's maybe sad, because it's just going to take way longer to educate people on what it means to, be a self-custodial human, to be self-sovereign, or whatever you call it. But I do hope we get there, even though that's a hard battle.
And great answer, Sebastian. If one of you guys want to take a stab at it, we have about 4 minutes. We're not going to have time for questions, but I'm sure any of these fine gentlemen will be more than happy to chat with you after our conversation. So we can finish up with if you guys, you can answer the question or final thoughts, whatever you have, and we'll wrap it up.
Wait, did you ask a question there?
I think just to continue on that as a final word.
Yeah, I mean, we can continue this discussion of where Sebastian left off about in terms of data and empowerment of the individual, where he was talking about education and getting people educated of the importance of what they're doing.
Okay, I get it. Sorry, guys. So no time for questions. Sorry, I'm super happy to take any questions after the chat. I do agree with you, right? We need to educate people, but there's also something that we who are, I think by default, we're all activists in this space, right? We're trying to, we have a strong vision, and we're trying to like bring that vision into reality, right? And we have to understand that that not everyone is an activist, right? So, for example, leaded gasoline was causing a shit ton of trouble for a lot of people. It drops, average IQ point if you're exposed to it by up to 20 points, right? That's a big drop, right? It was a big problem. But everybody was turning a blind eye, right? And basically activism, I can't remember the name of the guy, but basically his activism, lifelong activism to shed light on the issues with leaded gasoline, in spite of the like countermeasures by the fossil fuel industry, which then ended up achieving regulations for us, which then ended up achieving no leaded gasoline on the streets. Now, the average person today, if you look around, if you ask around, they may not even know what leaded gasoline is, how harmful it was, exactly how we ended up getting rid of it. It was just a matter of activists making change, which then ended up changing the world in a real way. I think when it comes to art technologies, the approach is similar. You must educate, very important, but you can't expect people to also be activists, right? You got to offer them something that is very easy and simple to use, and even if they don't really care about what you care about, right? Your vision. They don't care about decentralization. They don't care about self-sovereignty. The tool stands up to the test of, hey, I'm using this. Is this good? Is this at least as good as the other thing, right? And I think you achieve that by abstraction. And I'm okay with people not even understanding why this is so cool, as long as a lot of people do understand why this is so cool and important, and it is actually cool and important, and the code is open source. That's my take on this.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I think we're at the end of the road here, but I really believe this was an extremely valuable panel to help people wrap their heads around the idea of data colonialism and the importance of data sovereignty to get outside of the scope of dealing with these problems. And I just hope that we can continue to build the tools, push forward, and create this revolution in data that we need so desperately. So thank you all very much for the panel, for being here.
Thank you.